Thank you for listening to Perfectly Palm Beach. I want to thank my sponsors this month, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, whose mission is to rapidly accelerate the development of drugs to prevent, treat, and cure Alzheimer's disease, as well as Susan Listerlock Designs. Her contemporary and traditional custom jewelry using rare gems and precious metals is located on Nantucket and is open June through December and in Palm Beach January through May. Log on to SusanListerlock.com for more information. Hey guys, I'm just back at the studio and we just finished recording our episode with the Alzheimer's Drug and Discovery Foundation. I'm very excited to share it all with you. It's kind of an important subject and something that so many people are affected by. But before we start, I just wanted to thank you all so much for all of your support. I love all the emails and DMs that I get about Perfectly Palm Beach, and people are curious about my clothes and my jewelry. And I just wanted to give a little shout out to the jewelry that I'm wearing today, which is designs by Susan Listerlock. And she will take your pearls, or you can buy her pearls, and she attaches all these beautiful little charms, and you can engrave anything you want on them. And I just loved this, so I couldn't wait to wear it and share it with you guys. And then she has these beautiful earrings that are kind of an open design, and I'm wearing the sapphires today because I'm a blue girl. But they come in rubies and diamonds and emeralds, and they're just so beautiful. And then my gorgeous bracelet that I'm going to hold up for you guys, which is pounded 18, I think it's either 18 or 14 karat gold. And this is also beautiful sapphires in here. So check her out, Susan Listerlock. It's SusanListerlock with an E.com. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Perfectly Palm Beach. This is the great place to have good conversations with interesting Palm Beachers because there's so many people in town doing amazing things. It just never ends. And I'm just so pleased all the time that I run into so many people that are doing really great, interesting things and not just sitting in the sun or playing tennis and golf. I mean, all that's fun too, but it's really fun to be involved while you're here. So with no delay, I'm going to jump right into our guests today. We're tackling a very serious subject today, Alzheimer's, which is prevalent all across the country. And of course, in places like Southern Florida, where there's a lot of aging population, you hear about stories like this all the time. Today, we have Nancy Goods, who is my very dear friend and one of the governors of the Alzheimer Drug and Discovery Foundation. And joining her is Dr. Howard Fillit, who is a senior chief science officer, correct?
Correct.
And co-founder of the ADDF. Can we now move to the initials of that ADDF?
Yes.
Can we do that? Good. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm so happy that you guys are here. This is a really important,
it is good
really
to be
important
here.
Subject to tackle. I'd love to start with you, Nancy, though, because I think for so many of our listeners who are involved in taking care of a person who is struck by this disease, they're going to be able to relate to you right away. Tell us your journey a little bit and how you met Dr. Fillit and where you are in terms of taking care of your husband, Mel, who has advanced Alzheimer's.
My husband was diagnosed this summer of 2009, and he went to a top neurologist in New York City, and he said, "Here's a pill for your husband. Be nice to him and good luck." And
oh, no, you're kidding. That was it?
That was it. And I didn't know anyone else who had Alzheimer's.
They got to get you
19 years younger than my husband, and he didn't want anyone to know at that time. There's still an awful stigma about having Alzheimer's.
Right.
So close friends of ours were spending New Year's with us, and Mel decided to tell Rick Solomon. And Rick was associated with Rockefeller University, and he emailed the head of Rockefeller and said, "Who's the go-to guy for Alzheimer's?" Mm-hmm. And it was Dr. Fillit. Yes.
Who knew?
Who knew? And he said, "Dr. Fillit will call you on January 2nd. And I think you were in our house a week later.
Yeah.
And he wore two hats. One was fundraising and the other was, "I'll be Mel's doctor." And
so you received the great care that you needed, right?
Yes.
Three
yes.
hats.
What?
Research, care.
Right.
And we got to have money.
And friend.
Right.
And, it gave me a home, a community, a place that I could call and get help.
Comfort.
And comfort.
Right.
And a week later, Leonard Lauder showed up, and he and Mel really hit it off, and we joined the board at that point.
Yeah.
And can I talk about being sent to Scotland?
Yeah, let's talk about Scotland.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a trial going on in Scotland, in Aberdeen, Scotland, and Leonard sent Howard, Mel, and I to Scotland to get on this trial. It was for compassionate use. It was a repurposed drug, and we wouldn't give him something that had not been tested or, that would harm him.
Right.
And I think to this day, and Howard could speak more about it, it's 12 years later, and my husband is still very viable.
And doing so well.
He has late stage Alzheimer's, but he is happy and sweet and, still feeding himself, still talking, still exercising. Yeah. It's quite amazing.
It's
but
amazing.
My husband's a fighter too.
Right.
Mel's amazing because Mel, back maybe many years, I don't know how many decades ago, probably in the 1990s actually, he was CEO of Warner Lambert. And he was very well known and respected because he actually was when he was CEO of Warner Lambert, he brought Lipitor to market.
Right, so he's a well-known guy in the industry.
But the other thing that people don't know about Mel is that he brought the first drug for Alzheimer's disease to market back in 1995, which was kind of a really toxic drug with very little effect. But Mel recognized way back in 1995 that we needed drugs for Alzheimer's, and he was a champion and a pioneer, way out in front of everybody. And even though this drug was not the best drug and was never a commercial success, it opened up the door to all the subsequent drugs like donepezil or Aricept, which has always been the leading drug in the field. That was due to Mel's efforts. And the other thing about Mel that I want to say, which is amazing, he is a great speaker and advocate. And I'll never forget, I think we were at the Metropolitan Club, and Mel at the luncheon gave a speak. And basically he got up and said to all the people, I have Alzheimer's. And we're going to fight this thing.
Right.
And
he's
it was
still fighting.
So
he's
inspiring.
Yeah. It's so inspiring.
Exactly.
So
inspiring.
Well, Dr. Fillit, you came on in 1998. You're one of the co-founders with Leonard and Ronald Lauder, who were also Palm Beachers, who we love and respect. And they really contribute so much to our community and so much around the world.
Yeah.
So you guys are sort of the lead researchers, correct?
Well, we have a very unique model. So I took care of Estee Lauder for about 10 years, and the family saw what the disease was about,
right?
And they wanted to do something. And they thought a lot about what they could do. They're very well-known, extensive philanthropists.
Yes,
and they realized that the gap was in innovation in developing drugs. And so in starting this, it started as a family foundation, eventually morphed into the public charity, which is the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation.
Right.
And when they made the strategic plan and the mission, they said that we were going to do three things and nothing else. And it was all about developing treatments for Alzheimer's disease, doing drug development, taking risk on new drugs, developing drugs for prevention, and developing new diagnostic tests so that we could identify people early and definitely and specifically, and also use those tests for the development of new drugs. And the story is amazing. I mean, I say that with all humility, but the way it's played out over the last almost 25 years has just been incredible.
I mean, philanthropy obviously plays a huge role because it gives you the license to be able to do the things that you do. But I think that excuse me 1 second, Nancy, but I think that what our listeners really want to know about is the effect on the family, because everybody talks about how difficult it is for everybody involved when somebody in the family is diagnosed, and why. When I told people that you guys were coming on, everybody wanted to know, why is this disease so pervasive? What are the early, how do you?
Sure, we can talk about that.
I can speak about Mel and how, I mean, I battled with him for 2 years before I got him diagnosed, and I had to trick him into being diagnosed. Nobody wants that diagnosis.
Right.
Even though I think he knew his father had Alzheimer's. But he was very.
It's
a genetic.
Genetic.
Yes. My husband was genetically tested.
Okay.
But he was very repetitive in all his conversations. He was also pulling back socially because he felt inadequate and that he couldn't keep up with a conversation. He couldn't play bridge anymore, and he was turning more and more things over to me. who's delegating, and that's not who my husband was. He was saying, you pay the bill. And, so I knew something was off.
Right.
Because women ask me all the time, I said, if your husband's not paying attention to you, that doesn't mean he has Alzheimer's, because men have selective hearing.
Particularly when football is on.
Right. They only want to know when it's time to go.
Honey? Do I look fat? How does this dress look?
Yeah. But if your husband's asking you where we're going tonight 3 times, it doesn't mean he has Alzheimer's.
Yes.
Well, it's not just that, though. Actually, the average time from onset of first symptoms to diagnosis is about 2 years, which is a long time to be suffering. And it's not just the patient who's afraid to get the diagnosis. It's often the spouse who doesn't want to know and lives in denial. And the doctor doesn't really want to diagnose it, because when you diagnose Alzheimer's, and if you do it properly, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to make the diagnosis, although we've shortened that time now because we have a blood test on the market, which I could talk about, which is incredible.
Wow, okay.
And it's going to change the whole way we do primary care for Alzheimer's. But also, if you make the diagnosis, then it invokes a lot of education and counseling of the family. How do you take care of someone who's literally losing their mind?
Right, exactly.
And that's what I do. I'll spend an hour and a half with patients, but I get a lot of referrals from people that say, I have my doctor. I know I went to the neurologist. They told me I had Alzheimer's. They gave me a pill, and that was it. And that's, these people need to be cared for.
Right.
I mean, being cared for, it's what I've been doing for 40 years with people.
Because it can be a very long, drawn-out
illness.
It is.
It's a long, drawn-out.
I know you're affiliated with Mount Sinai, which I think I didn't say in the beginning, and I'm sorry, because I certainly want to give the hospital that kind of that nod. It's such an important institution.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if you could literally just quickly, before we continue, tell us the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, because I think people
I get asked that all the time.
Everybody wants to know the difference.
It's very simple. If somebody came into the office and they were pale, and they were weak and they were tired, I'd do blood tests, right? And maybe their blood count is low, so I'd say they have an anemia. Okay?
Right.
Now, what's the next thing I do? I try to find out why they have an anemia. I want to get to a diagnosis. Okay. Anemia just describes a patient. It's what we call a syndrome. But it's not a diagnosis per se of a cause. Okay. So maybe they have a bowel cancer and they're losing blood in the bowel. Maybe they have some sort of reaction against their blood cells, that they're destroying their blood cells, called a hemolytic anemia. Okay. So we do various tests to figure out why somebody has a low blood count, and we come up with a diagnosis. Okay. So dementia is like anemia. It describes the patient. It's a chronic, progressive loss of cognition and function that's not due to it's not due to like a tumor or stroke. It's due to Alzheimer's disease. And so the 70% of people that have dementia in its various stages, from mild cognitive impairment, which is the earliest stages, which is characterized only by primarily memory loss, short-term memory loss, and little deficits in abstract reasoning, basically executive function. That progresses over a period of 3 to 5 years to mild dementia, where people start having functional loss, like they can't do their finances, they can't make plans, they might start having trouble picking out their clothes. Then that goes to moderate and severe dementia. In severe dementia, a person is completely dependent on care. They're like a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. They can't dress themselves. They can't bathe themselves. They can't feed themselves. When they try to feed themselves, they often aspirate food. The food goes in the lungs, causes pneumonia, called aspiration pneumonia, and that's the most common cause of death. So Alzheimer's is a chronic, progressive, uniformly fatal form of neurodegeneration, and it causes 70% of the cases of dementia. And the reason that's important, and I'll stop, is that about 10% of cases of dementia, when a person comes into the clinic and goes through a diagnostic evaluation, they're reversible causes, like thyroid problems or B12 problems, or maybe little strokes that we pick.
Too much iron, too.
Sometimes. Yeah. So we have to go through a proper diagnostic algorithm to get to the right diagnosis.
But it's mostly people that are older, right? Because
the average age of onset is about 70, 75. But the disease starts, we know from these brain scans that we help to develop, we can see the disease now in the brain on a PET scan 20 years before people develop symptoms. Imagine that we could send 50-year-olds, 55-year-olds to get a brain scan, or today, now it's a blood test that correlates with the brain scan. And we find these people 20 years before they develop symptoms. We can do prevention studies. And prevention, so now we can do prevention research to prevent, because that's really the goal, right? We want to prevent people.
Well, right, exactly. That kind of leads me into my other question, which, you want to add something else?
Well, yeah, because I was like a bull in a china shop with my husband, because I knew that if he was diagnosed, there was something we could do. You wait too long, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
And so the earlier you're diagnosed, the more there is treatment for you. If I could have gotten 5 more years with my husband, that would have been precious.
Right, exactly.
You probably did get 5 years.
I probably did.
I probably got 10.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the preventative stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. So in doing my research about this, and my brain always goes to environment and food and things like diet and lack of exercise. So what does the research show you in terms of those kinds of things?
Yeah,
what brings it on? What develops that sticky stuff in your brain? That's the amyloids?
The amyloid plaques.
What causes that?
Well, we think we have some ideas, but we don't really know exactly what causes it. But, in some ways you could think of it as a scar. Little scars in the brain that add up and build up and kill brain cells. The brain is constantly being injured. Constantly. All our cells are constantly being injured. But we have amazing repair mechanisms, right?
Right.
So, but as we age, the injury starts to overcome the repair mechanisms. And these cellular debris from injury just start accumulating in these plaques.
But that's from hitting your head, or
no,
that's
it's just from normal cellular,
just from life, just cellular degeneration.
Cellular, it's aging of the brain, aging of the brain.
I don't like that word. I hate that word. Okay.
Inflammation, for example.
But a lot of that is diet and lack of exercise, and is
right?
So you can control inflammation development in your body.
Exactly. So, well, to some degree. So what happened?
I'm hoping.
So there was a study, and they from the British called the Lancet Commission recently showed that if you took care of 12 factors, 12 risk factors, you could reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's by 40%, which is amazing because if you just to put it in some sort of context, if the average age of onset of dementia is 75, and the average age of death is 80. Right? Mm-hmm. So if we could delay the average age of onset of dementia by 5 years, then 50% less people would die without losing their minds. And that's the goal of geriatric medicine.
Right.
Quality of life.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So that's an achievable goal. And recently, based on 40 years of prevention research, mostly epidemiology, observational studies, following people, looking at associations of diet and exercise and smoking and alcohol and sleep, lifestyle, plus comorbidity management, which means diabetes, hypertension, obesity. And so there's 12 of these risk factors, hearing loss. And they all the experts got together and published this huge report and said that if people did all these things for 20, 30 years, that 40% of the cases would be prevented. So we have the knowledge now to do prevention.
That sounds good. Right.
And if you think about the way we prevent heart disease, it's the same thing.
Right.
Same
and cancer
factor.
And all these other diseases.
But what's the difference? The difference in heart disease is that we add a statin. Because we know cholesterol plays a role in heart disease, in addition to exercise and all these other things. So we're funding a trial out of Finland, Sweden, and London, where one of our current board members actually is leading this trial, and we've given her quite a bit of money. She's doing a prevention trial, a randomized control prevention trial, which is the highest level of evidence to show that you really can prevent something. And she showed that this really works. The placebo was people who just got like one-time counseling and didn't really comply with the program. And her randomized intervention was to make sure that people were compliant over not a long period of time. It was only over several months. But what we're doing, like in heart disease, where you add a drug, we're adding a drug called metformin, which is the leading anti-aging drug. It's also a diabetic agent. But we've funded.
Wait, that's a drug for Alzheimer's?
For diabetes.
For diabetes.
But we repurposed it. Nancy mentioned repurposing. We have almost 20 repurposing trials going on now because it's a wonderful way to learn how drugs work and get to market quickly.
But you have a new drug, right, that was just introduced recently?
That's not our drug.
Oh, that's your not.
No.
Okay.
Well,
but you got. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, actually, our foundation enabled the FDA to approve that drug. I mean, I'm not over exaggerating. Okay, what happened was we helped to invent this brain scan that identifies the plaques in living people. So you can see I can order this test in my private practice. And if somebody has a memory problem, I can order that test. They go down the street to the radiology office. They get the PET scan. And the next morning, I can know with 90%, 95% certainty if they have Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. Now, that's changing clinical care. And with the blood test, you're reducing the cost by almost tenfold, and you don't have to go for the brain scan. And that's on the market in 49 states. But what it did was it changed the way we do clinical trials.
But the blood test that you're saying that you have, which is a directly linked to the ADDF, right? That you guys...
We invested in a company out of Washington University that was spun out of Washington University that developed the blood test. Mm-hmm. And the blood test correlates very highly with the brain scan. But the thing about the brain scan, what happened was we were doing clinical trials of these anti-amyloid drugs without knowing if people had amyloid in their brain.
People were being misdiagnosed.
30% of people that went into the clinical trials didn't have Alzheimer's, so you couldn't get a result.
Right.
So then
and you couldn't tell if it was working either, because there was no end result you couldn't see.
Exactly.
There's so much in the world that has, our plant-based diets and lifestyle changes that people have made.
Yeah.
We know how much exercise, how that affects the body in
the
beneficial
brain.
ways, and the brain. Diet, isn't there, if you exercise all the time, you keep your alcohol level down, you eat, a plant-based diet, you're basically as healthy as you possibly can be.
Yeah.
You don't drink, you don't
do anything bad.
That was
my husband.
But he had a genetic component.
Right. He had a genetic component.
Right.
He
but
had everything going for him on the health scale as far as proper care.
Are you seeing Alzheimer's development in people that don't have a genetic component?
Yes.
Of course.
Because there's so many ways to get to Alzheimer's. And that's the problem with developing drugs. Just like in cancer, we need 4 or 5 drugs to treat people.
Why is that? Is it
just
aging?
Aging, the cell goes wrong.
Why does aging have to be that way? Honestly.
You have to ask God. I really don't know the answer.
No, there has to be something that, I'm not talking about the fountain of youth, but I'm talking about, just doing everything right. You can walk outside and get hit by a car, of course, too, but still, it would be nice to know that you're doing as much as you can do.
Yeah.
And
but isn't it more about aging? And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people did not live as long. My grandparents were all dead in the 70s. Did my grandmother have Alzheimer's? My mother did. My mother lived to 89.
Nothing is certain. It's relative risk.
Right.
People feel better. And there are studies that show that people who do these preventative things, actually they have better cognition.
Right.
And they're protected.
Right.
So it's not like all or none. We're not going to just stop it.
It feels like this disease affects everybody. Everybody I know knows somebody.
Well,
it affects their family.
Let's look at the numbers. Okay, so at age 65, it's about 5% of older people. Mm-hmm. At age 75, it's about 25% of older people, which is a lot of people. Mm-hmm. At age 85, it's 50%, 50%.
Those aren't good numbers.
Those
are not good
and there
numbers.
are studies. So right now, there's about 6 million people with dementia in the United States. Diagnosed dementia. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There was a recent study that suggested, based on brain scans, when you extrapolate what we see on brain scans in the general community, there is probably 47 million people that are cooking Alzheimer's disease right now, and they don't know it. And those are the people we want to get to prevention.
Yes, of course.
And of course, everyone says, I don't want to know. I don't want to be diagnosed.
Right.
Especially if you're 55 or 60.
I don't want to know.
No. Yeah, exactly.
Who does want to know?
Your involvement since the very beginning is as one of the co-founders.
Yeah.
So obviously you guys, the ADDF is just an incredible foundation, and what you've been able to do through the support of all the philanthropy is really incredible.
Yeah.
Is there something
talk
very...
about the venture philanthropy.
I was just going to say, exactly.
So when we incorporated, as I said, we told the IRS, these are 3 things we're going to do. We're going to develop drugs for treatment, drugs for prevention, and new diagnostic tests that are going to accelerate drug development. And that's exactly what happened with this new drug, Aduhelm. It was our test that enabled the accelerated approval. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
That is amazing.
But we also told the IRS that we were going to be a venture philanthropy because the activity that we were in, the space that we were in was to develop drugs, and that ultimately the success of that is commercial access, right? Market access, patient access.
Correct. Yeah.
So we wanted to be able to invest in biotech companies, because if you just invest in academia, especially at that time, they don't know how to develop drugs. They do the basic research. We wanted to be we were totally focused. We don't do patient care, education, advocacy in Washington. We don't do basic research. All we do is fund and invest in the development of new drugs, period.
Which is huge. Which is really huge.
And so what happens is, as we want to do that, we have to engage with industry. We have to invest in these small biotechs that have tremendous amount of difficulty getting money because it's so risky. Between 2003 and just this last approval, we had almost 100% failure rate. I mean, failure after failure after failure. But from every failure, we learned something.
You mean from investing in these biotech companies?
We have
drugs being able to go to market. Yes.
So what's the failure?
The failure is the drug didn't make it to the market because the drug didn't work. But we learned from every drug that we invested in, and now we're harvesting all of that experience, and we're going to see drugs coming to market. We've just only seen the first one, but it takes 20 years to develop a drug. You're going to hear about that later today with Dr. Longo from Stanford. We've been investing with Dr. Longo for over 20 years. Wow. That takes a long time and a lot of money.
My husband ran a drug company 25 years, and now it's billions of dollars to bring a drug to market. And when you have the failure rate of Alzheimer's drugs, there's not that many people who want to go there.
Investors don't want to go there. So that's why venture philanthropy is so important. These small biotechs.
It's medicine and business together.
Yeah. And philanthropy.
But I don't think a lot of people are doing that, are they?
Well, when we started in 1998, we were one of the only organizations, philanthropy, that were doing venture philanthropy.
Right.
But now people, other organizations have seen the light, and each one is doing it in their own way, taking risks.
That's why we got attached. And my husband thought it was a brilliant model, and it was something that we wanted to invest in.
So, can you guys talk a little bit about the sort of, I guess I would call it the educational part of the disease? In other words, how do you educate all the people in the family in terms of when the diagnosis comes in?
That's separate from the foundation. So I have a small private practice.
Okay, so the foundation doesn't do that, but you do.
I do that in my practice,
right, okay.
and I think good doctors do that, or ancillary providers, nurses, or whatever. Depends on the center.
I wish I could say there were that many good doctors that really counsel the families.
You don't get paid for counseling. Yeah. I mean, I'd be ashamed to tell you how much medication.
It's such a big part of the disease, right? It affects everybody.
Well, I think, for example, the Alzheimer's Association does some of that through their nurse lines, and some of the Association on Aging around the country do it, and hopefully, doctors would do it. But like I say, I do it, but it takes me an hour and sometimes more than that, and then I'm with them and I tell people, I'm with you on this journey. Okay, this is a long journey, and it's a horrifying journey.
He's gotten many frantic calls from me because, I want to stay one step ahead of what's happening to my husband, so I'm prepared for it.
Yes.
And I think we've sort of done that with Mel because, you do know what's coming next.
And he's gone through stages.
He certainly has.
Gone through.
And I counsel a lot of women. They call me because it's a very scary place to be, especially in the beginning when, my husband said to me, I think I'm losing my mind. And you have to really invest and love your spouse.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Exactly.
Nancy's like the icon of caregiving. I'm not kidding. I mean, she's done an amazing job.
She's done an amazing job. Yes, she does. So what's next for you guys? What is the ADDF going to focus on?
Well, we have a wonderful event coming up on March 3rd. We're honoring Erin and Jane Lauder at the Beach Club, and it'll be an evening event, and we'd love everybody to come out for this. And I'm very excited that the Lauder girls are investing in this with us, the next generation of Lauders.
Right, exactly. That sounds good. And Dr. Fillit, what's your next thing?
My next thing?
Your next thing, right? Besides all your patients that you take care of.
What do you have in a half an hour?
What do you hope is the next thing for the ADDF?
Well, for one thing, I hope to get home tomorrow.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh.
But
no more snow.
No, ADDF, the science has moved forward. So when we started, we did a lot of drug discovery, which means preclinical drug research, creating new molecules through medicinal chemistry, testing those molecules in animals to see if they have an effect on the disease as it's engineered in the animals.
Right.
And then drugs move into the clinic, and they get tested for safety in phase 1, and then they get tested for efficacy if there's a signal on some outcome in phase 2, and then they get proof and validation in phase 3. And what we've done in the last 3 or 4 years is shift from kind of an 80% emphasis on the preclinical innovation to a time where we realized that there's been enough 20 years of this kind of drug innovation in the preclinical space, and it's time to develop and conduct these clinical trials that actually test the drug in humans, because this is a uniquely human disease.
This is where we come into the 20-year lineup, right?
Yes.
It takes
a long time.
Right.
But these drugs have to be, we've had so many success. We've cured mice like 700 times. It's not an exaggeration. But when you do this is common in depression and other diseases. You use the mice for certain function to see if your drug gets into the brain and if it affects certain pathology. But ultimately, you have to test these drugs in humans. And Alzheimer's is a uniquely human disease. I mean, mice don't write books, right? They don't do that kind of thing. So it's time for us to.
Well, there's no genetic component for a mouse.
Well, we engineer the mice to have the genetic components.
Yeah, they give them
okay.
But so we've shifted our funding to 80% clinical trials now. And that's really exciting, because we're going to have a big part of our portfolio on these repurposed drugs, which is a really important role for the foundation, because pharmaceutical companies don't really want to do that, because the revenue, the ultimate payout of a repurposed drug is not that great. But the scientific advances that, Viagra, multiple myeloma drugs like Revlimid and thalidomide was thalidomide, and it was repurposed for multiple myeloma and became the leading drug from. There's many examples of this kind of thing.
Right.
So we've had success in the last few years of repurposed drugs. Drugs that we've taken from ALS, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, even cancer, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and on. I won't go into the science or the theories of why they make sense to test them in Alzheimer's, but they do. And we've gotten really interesting results. So the next, let's say 5 years, the 5-year goal is to really invest in innovation in clinical trials. And we're currently raising a very large clinical trial fund, because clinical trials are really expensive. I mean, a clinical trial at $5 million barely makes it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the phase 2 trials are 25 to 50 million. And then when you want proof of concept at the phase 3, that where you can ultimately go to the FDA for approval, you're talking about needing a pharma partner, because those trials are $300-400 million.
Right. Well, you've come so far. You do so much for the disease, so much awareness, so much education. I mean, somebody like in Nancy's position has really been able to, find a place, a community where she can really get a lot of support. And I think that's a huge step in terms of the drugs that you're investing in. I'm sure that soon there'll be, hopefully, even greater strides for this very, very debilitating disease for not just the patient, but the whole family.
Yeah.
So we thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. So stay tuned, guys, for more episodes on Perfectly Palm Beach.